Today's discussion will be presented in 3 sections since we're recording this session for a radio broadcast on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. Feel free to post questions and comments during the session, and we'll try to get them answered online. We're particularly pleased to welcome our moderator, Jason Miller, the executive editor of Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com. Let me turn over the reins to Jason to begin today's session.
Welcome to the discussion today. This should be an excellent and informative conversation about the intersection of cybersecurity and big data analytics. I'm your host, Jason Miller. Our guests today are Barron-DiCamillo, the director of the U.S. Computer Emergency Readiness Team, or U.S. CERT, at the Homeland Security Department, Jeff Wagner, the director of IT security for the Office of Personnel Management, and Mark Palmer, a senior vice president for integration and event processing at TIBCO. Welcome to the show. Before we get started, let me set a little context to our discussion today. Big data, cybersecurity. It seems like we talk about these two topics all the time. Usually we talk about cybersecurity in the context of securing data, securing networks, figuring out how to stop, react, mitigate, manage the risk of the onslaught of cyber attacks that are impacting agencies and companies alike. Then there's big data. Many times the conversation focuses on tools, understanding where the data lives, what it can be used for, who's using the data. But what's not happening enough is really the discussion around the intersection of big data and cybersecurity, and how together they can potentially make systems and networks safer, more resilient to attack, and even move from the reactive to the proactive side of the equation. Take, for example, Gartner. It wrote about the convergence of big data and cybersecurity in February 2014 and said big data will supply intelligence-driven models to let organizations better grasp potential security problems. In fact, Gartner predicts that more global organizations by 2016 will adopt big data analytics for at least one security and fraud detection use case. Analysts expect that number to rise to 25% from 8% today. And there's a lot of growth in this area too. Forrester Research estimates most companies analyze only about 12% of the data they collect, and the amount of data obviously will only increase as more sensors send information back to the Security Operations Center. Good thing is help is on the way, whether it's from DHS and its Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation Program, CDM, from individual agencies' Security Operations Centers, or SOCs. Agencies are starting to take advantage of big data analytics to improve how they're protecting their networks. We're also seeing this with the new Cyber Threat Intelligence Integration Center, or CTIC, that the White House announced as part of its effort to be more collaborative with industry when it comes to cybersecurity information sharing. So I think there's a growing recognition that big data can help cybersecurity, and cybersecurity can take better advantage of big data. How this will work? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. Once again, our guests today are Barron-DiCamillo, the director of the U.S. Computer Emergency Readiness Team, or U.S. CERT, at the Homeland Security Department, Jeff Wagner, the director of IT security for the Office of Personnel Management, and Mark Palmer, a senior vice president for integration and event processing at TIBCO. So let me turn to Jeff first on this one. We're going to go a little out of order per se. You and I did a tremendous interview a couple months back regarding real-time analytics. And one of the reasons that I wanted you to come to our panel today was because you guys are doing some really super things. So let's just start. How are you using this data analytics to mesh with your cybersecurity to give OPM better protection?
Well, first off, one thing we look at the most is visibility. We talked about it before, the audit by visibility concept, in which we see everything that flows through the network, we log everything, and we utilize those analytics to be able to have better knowledge of not only what's in our environment, but the incident response capabilities that we have there. And then we utilize that information as well to do automation for better business efficiency and response. You don't have a whole lot of time to respond to these things, and response is the biggest ticket that you need to work on, getting that time of identification and remediation down as fast as possible to protect your data.
And going back to the automation piece, automating some of these functionality really saves you time, so you can have that better response. So you're not worrying about, well, are we checking this, or who's looking at the audit logs? Is that the automation benefit?
Correct. I mean, the more I can automate the flow and processes, the less I have people trying to make decisions on where things are, the faster I can have those decisions be made in doing the remediation instead of the identification.
Now, both Ann and Mark, you guys are shaking your heads, so let me turn to Ann first. We'll give the ladies first privilege on this one, Mark.
Thank you.
Ann, give me a sense from U.S. CERT's perspective. You guys get all the data from everyone. How are you guys starting to use big data analytics to really sift through that data? Because it can be overwhelming.
You're right. It can be overwhelming. And I think it gets back to what Jeff was saying about the flows of the data between the systems and the visibility of that. I think if you look at industry standards around real-time analytics and automation, your goal is to automate about 80% of that analytical information sharing. And then that way you can use your cyber relevant resources to manually look through about 20%. So I think industry standard 80 to 85% is the automation goal for analytics. And that's pretty much how we're approaching it. I think that's how the .gov is approaching it as a goal. Obviously that's sometimes it's a stretch goal to get there. And there's all kinds of new capabilities that are constantly coming in. But you really want to leverage as much automation as you can so that you can use those precious resources, specifically in cyber, to do the more heavy lifting manual review.
Now, from a U.S. CERT's perspective, you have Cyberscope. You're going to have some dashboards that are related to CDM eventually.
Yes.
That's further down the road.
Right. We have all kinds of real-time analytics tools that we use, all part of the National Cybersecurity Protection System. I have to actually look at the acronym. Sometimes I get it wrong. It's NCPS, and it's what we refer to as the Einstein systems. And so those are some of the tools that we're leveraging for real-time data analytics and information sharing across the .gov, and then even further into critical infrastructure. We also leverage information that comes from those systems to share with our partners internationally. We have a large international CERT-to-CERT relationship, and cyber has no borders, and so it's really important to be able to share with them in as close to real time as we can.
Let me turn to Mark, because you also were shaking your head as Jeff was kind of going through this. What are you seeing from your customers, your federal customers, your industry customers, when it comes to this automation piece and how they're applying this data analytics to cybersecurity?
Yeah, the interesting thing that our company focuses on real time, and a lot of times we talk about real time analytics. And I think the shift that we've seen maybe the last 2 or 3 years is with the dramatic increase in both commercials and the government, right, using sensor-based information. That takes the level of information to another order of magnitude. So all of a sudden, the idea of continuously applying analytics becomes, I think, more important, as opposed to, fundamentally the state of the art of big data and Hadoop is to store information into basically a data lake that's static, that's historical. And then going back through it and looking for things of interest, right? So the 80-20 rule is an interesting one, right? On Wall Street, for example, I think where the volumes are astronomical, right? There's more, where we're moving there is more to a 99.1% of analytical capability that you can do during the day. You simply can't look at a billion things in one day. And often it is at that moment where you don't necessarily have to act on that, but at least identify anomalies and drill down while they come in. And that's where this sort of streaming analytics topic comes in, or continuous analytics, or real-time, constant processing. It's really not about often making the real-time decision. It's about detecting the anomaly in real time and then drilling down and taking some action that might be manually guided.
And go ahead.
Follow up on that. One of the things from the U.S. perspective is we're dealing with about 40 billion net flow records a day. So the big data issue is obviously something that we were trying to put our arms around. But it's comparing that current snapshot or real-time monitoring against what we think it should look like. And I think that kind of gets back to the 80-20 rule. There's always going to be some aspect of some eyes on from a government perspective that you're going to want to have. And I think that rule is a like I said, a stretch goal, but it's something that depending on your risk posture and your risk decisions can help. It can flow one way or another.
Yeah. And
Jeff,
continue on. I mean, when we talk about real-time analytics and eyes on, our sensors have moved from firewalls and web logs and things of that nature, and we have tools now that are literally capturing the binaries as they're passing across the wire in order to do microsecond type captures and sensor reviews. By the time you go to your, back to your logs to dig back into the past, you're too late. So our automation and our big data stuff is really just to try to help us discover and find new ways to shrink that sensor time down into the microseconds instead of days or weeks or months. You got to catch it as soon as it happens, or you're cleaning something up.
And I think that's a great point, because one of the things is, Mark, you're going through that, and even the 99-to-1 ratio that you brought up on Wall Street. Are there alerts that can be set up? Is there a way to say, hey, this looks funny or this doesn't smell right? Someone should look at it. Mark, start off, and Jeff, you're next.
I think the challenge there is absolutely. I think everybody has alerting systems. The challenge in alerting systems is to reduce the false positives. So that's where I think the analytics actually gets really interesting, and why I think real-time analytics have to be coupled, or streaming analytics have to be coupled with traditional offline analytics. And the offline analytics looks at the historical pattern, and you have to constantly search. I often think about it as this Darwinian progression of the intelligence of algorithms, right? Where you have an algorithm, you run it in real time, you automate it, right? You measure how well it's doing. You actually look at the effect. You measure whether or not you can get, now historically, reduced amount and more accurate false positives, until you finally find the perfect algorithm. There is no such thing as a perfect algorithm, because there's another dimension of time which is interesting in terms of the progression of the intelligence. These algorithms, when you're dealing with cybersecurity, they don't last. They're not effective very long. Just like on Wall Street, trading algorithms, they have a shelf life of about 6 weeks. That's actually been measured, right? Here, it could be even shorter. So it is that loop, I think, of continuing to get the algorithms more intelligent that is the key to reducing false positives on alarms, and make it more effective to do your drill down and analysis from a human perspective.
Mark, I thought you were going down the path of the space-time continuum. I thought we were getting way off of cybersecurity. Thanks for bringing us back.
You're welcome.
Let me go to Jeff real quick. As we were talking about the alert pieces, how do you deal with that from a CISO, from a director of IT security?
So, in trying to reduce our time frame in which we're finding things, we're putting hooks all the way out to the endpoint to say, not only to look at the binaries that are passing across the wire and doing binary DNA scoping, but we're also actually putting the hooks on folders and different pieces within the endpoints to try to create a behavior type analysis of what the user is touching and what the user is doing on a regular basis. So when something happens on the machine that the user isn't naturally doing, we have that behavior analysis that triggers an alarm to say, hey, look, this is something that's not happening out of the ordinary, therefore we need to kind of take a look at it. And there's always going to be that point in which we have eyes on target to try to thin out the false positive herd. But for us, we're moving more and more and more towards the behavior analytics of insider threat than the common, defense in depth that we've lived with for decades now. Our adversaries aren't coming in through breaking the firewalls; they're coming in as users themselves. And so I need to really, truly determine, this worker worked from 8 to 4, and he normally works from 7 to 2, so why is there all of a sudden a change? And I need to review that. And there are going to be false positives, but we need to make sure they are false positives.
And what do you do when you do find that a difference of behavior? Do you go to their manager and say, hey, did John change his hours, or did Mary have to work on this special project? Or how does that work?
Well, the first thing I do is call Ann.
Yes.
So, no, we do. We normally have like a procedure where we talk to the managers, find out, is this person teleworking? Is this person sick? I mean, we recently had an instance where someone had a baby and now she's on maternity leave. She's working from home. Okay, that's an interesting case, and we'll just chalk that up. Do you know when she's coming back so I can log it and I don't get another false positive?
Now, can you build that into your algorithm that says Mary now is working from home between
Absolutely.
Monday and Thursdays for the next 6 weeks?
Absolutely.
Oh, so you don't get the alert,
correct,
per se. And let me turn to you a little bit, because one of the things that you guys at US CERT are dealing with is not just the volume of data, but just how to relate it back to all those different agencies. From your perspective, are you looking even at false positives or trying to call the false positive herd, or are you looking at different things because just the 50,000-foot view?
So both. I think there's a responsibility. It's a shared responsibility in how we interact with departments and agencies. We're at the boundary, and so a lot of the information we're seeing at the boundary is something that we're alerting them about, and then helping them with the investigation as it's relevant to whatever that network indicator happened to be associated with. There's a difference of sophistication across the departments and agencies as there is across critical infrastructure and industry. And so some agencies need a lot more coaching and assistance and helping them kind of create those kinds of algorithms. That's the real trick in all of this, is trying to create an algorithm, because there's no silver bullet. There's no one-fit solution or one-size-fit-all solution for departments and agencies and how to approach cybersecurity. And I think the critical thing to emphasize here is that it's always evolving. So what works for you today is not going to work for you tomorrow, because the adversary is also evolving in their tradecraft. And so you have to keep up with that and ensure that information is getting passed out to our constituencies in as close to real time as possible, and that it's actionable. So lots of responsibilities that we're trying to tackle at US CERT, but it's a shared responsibility. It's a team sport, and working with great folks like Jeff has made our job a lot easier.
Absolutely, it's a team sport. Just real quick, Mark, from your perspective, you mentioned earlier, and I just want to tag about this because I think Anne touches upon it. The algorithm is only good for about 6 weeks, so you're always kind of constantly updated. And as you said, no silver bullet. How do you find that right balance of when to change, when not to change? Give us about 30 seconds.
Sure. So, what we see as a pattern is the link between big data repositories and real-time analytics has to be in a circle, right? So you're absorbing as much information as you can. You're creating an algorithm, you're deploying it, and then you're testing the results. And in that process, you're kind of constantly creating a new thesis, constantly, that's why I call it Darwinian almost, right? You look at algorithms, you think of algorithms as almost a species, right? The ones that work, you enhance. The ones that don't work, you kill off. And gradually, the techniques and the strategies and the analytics become smarter. You create new ones, which might be hybrids of old ones. And that's sort of the progression we've seen. Again, Wall Street's a great example because the algorithms are constantly sort of evolving in that way, and the algorithms that worked even just 6 weeks ago don't work anymore. So I think it's that cycle of big data to real-time streaming analytics that's the key to make it as tight and efficient and easy as possible.
All right. Good definition of the algorithm nature. I like the Darwinian analogy, so we'll steal that maybe another time. We're going to take a quick break. You're listening to the panel discussion, Cybersecurity Game Changer, Real-Time Stream Processing in Government, sponsored by TIBCO on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM.